In the 1900s, a bold con artist was accused of committing what has been titled the fraud of the century. He became one of the most notorious figures in history, dubbed a financial idiot who couldn't even add, but had successfully managed to orchestrate the greatest financial scam ever, duping investors out of $15 million in 1919, the equivalent of around $220 million in today's values. His name was Charles Ponzi, and he is remembered today for the Ponzi scheme that bears his infamous name. In today's video, we will take you through the life of Ponzi from his humble beginnings in Italy to the peak of his financial success in Boston, and then the eventual downfall that led him to infamy and a prison sentence for multiple counts of federal mail fraud. So, stick around and see how Charles Ponzi changed the face of financial crime forever. Charles Ponzi, born to swindle. Charles Ponzi was born Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tiblado Ponzi. That's quite a mouthful. On March 3, 1882, in the northern Italy town of Lugo. Ponzi stated that his parents, Oreste and Imelda Ponzi, were from a wealthy Italian family that had fallen into poverty by the time he was born. Even as a young child, Ponzi showed criminal tendencies, stealing from his parents and even the parish priest, indicating that he was resentful of his reality and that it irked him that he was born poor. This feeling persisted throughout his life, leading to a lifelong pattern of dishonesty. This resentment and need for monetary gain drove Ponzi to take on a series of ill-fated investments and schemes that would eventually land him in jail. However, before any of that could take place, Ponzi had a long journey to the United States and an unsuccessful effort at further education in Italy to complete. And so he enrolled at La Sapienza University of Rome, where he admits that he wasn't exactly a model student or even close to being one. His wealthier friends saw college as a 4-year vacation, so Ponzi, who desired nothing more in life except to live it like the rich, joined his friends at nightclubs, restaurants, and the opera. And soon enough, he had spent all of his money, and 4 years later, he was still financially strapped and without an education. Many young Italian males at the time left their homeland for the United States, eventually resettling in Italy as wealthy businessmen. Ponzi's relatives urged him to follow suit and restore the family name's former prominence. So Ponzi, full of ideas and eagerness to learn and make something of himself, decided to pack his bags and head over to America in search of a better life. He sailed into Boston Harbor on the SS Vancouver on November 15, 1903, and according to his own account, he had only $2.50 on him, having exhausted his entire life savings in gambling during the trip. Old habits die hard. Upon his arrival in the United States, Ponzi was inspired by tales of rags to riches success and determined to achieve financial independence as quickly as possible. He picked up the language quickly and then spent the following 2 years working various jobs along the East Coast. The self-proclaimed jack of all trades described his time in many occupations there as follows. I tried my hand at everything, from grocery clerk to road drummer, from sewing machine repairman to insurance salesman, from factory hand to kitchen and dining room help. In some of the jobs I lasted no time, in others I lasted longer. Often I would be fired. Oftener I would quit on my own accord, either disgusted or to avoid being fired. Soon it became apparent that Ponzi had no trouble landing jobs, but as the saying goes, old habits die hard. The man continued his habit of stealing, which invariably always got him fired. Moved to Montreal. During his time in the United States, Ponzi called several cities home, including Pittsburgh, New York, New Haven, Providence, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Failing to understand that the fault was within himself and not the country itself, he moved to Montreal, Quebec, Canada, in 1907, where he obtained a position as an assistant teller at the recently established Banco Zarossi. Luigi Louis Zarossi had opened this bank on Saint Jacques Street to help the growing number of Italian immigrants moving to the city. It was the perfect job for Ponzi, and it was here that Ponzi first observed the scheme of robbing Peter to pay Paul, which would later be called the Ponzi Scheme. Ponzi rose to the position of bank manager soon, but unfortunately for him, not long after, a lot of bad real estate loans put the bank in a precarious financial position. So, Luigi Louis Zarossi, the founder, attempted to avoid bankruptcy by using deposits from new customers to pay the interest. Eventually, though, the bank failed and Zarossi took most of the assets and fled to Mexico. As a result, the unsuspecting customers were left with empty accounts, and Ponzi started to see how his now famous robbing Peter to pay Paul plan as a viable solution to solve his money problems. Soon, a penniless Ponzi attempted to forge a check made out to himself, but he was caught and spent nearly 3 years in a Canadian prison. After being released from prison in 1911, he returned to the United States and quickly became embroiled in a new criminal scheme: the transportation of illegal Italian immigrants into the country. And once again, he was arrested and spent the next 2 years in jail. The scheme. After his release from prison, Ponzi came back to Boston, where in 1919 he began devising various money-making schemes. It was then that he first learned about the International Reply Coupon, IRC, which was developed by the United States Postal Service, the USPS. Through the use of IRCs, Ponzi discovered that he could buy postage coupons in foreign countries for a fraction of their face value and then sell them in the United States for a much higher rate. During the 1900s, the Postal Service provided foreign reply coupons, which allowed a sender to pre-purchase postage and include it in their message. The coupon would then be traded at the post office near the recipient for a priority airmail postage stamp. Stamps were frequently more expensive in one country than another due to the changes in postage prices. Ponzi immediately recognized an opportunity in the practice and hired agents to purchase inexpensive international reply coupons on his behalf and transport them to him. He swapped the coupons for stamps, which were more expensive than the coupons themselves. To generate a profit, the stamps were then sold at a higher price. The method of business called arbitrage is a perfectly lawful way of making gains, but Ponzi, being Ponzi, became greedy and soon turned his business into a scam. In early 1920, he established his security exchange company and persuaded others to invest in it in exchange for an additional 50% in interest within 90 days. Given his success in the postage stamp scheme, no one doubted his intentions, and with such enticing returns that were too good to pass up, investor interest grew tremendously. Ponzi didn't stop there. He further deceived investors by claiming to have a sophisticated network of agents throughout Europe, capable of purchasing coupons in bulk for them, and that he could easily turn these coupons into financial rewards in the United States. As expected, Ponzi didn't use this growing pile of money from new investors to buy more IRCs. Instead, he kept some of it for himself and gave the rest to investors who had been with him for a while. Many of these investors were so happy with their returns that they put some of their money back into Ponzi's scheme, which kept the scam going. But when people asked him about how his business worked, he just told them that he couldn't tell them, as he did not want anyone to compete with him. But unfortunately for Ponzi, as his wealth and fame grew like wildfire, people soon began to question what he was doing, and his business came under increased scrutiny. The end of Ponzi's reign. One reporter, financial journalist Clarence Barron, found that Ponzi did not invest in his own scheme and instead had invested his own money in real estate, stocks, and bonds. This did not make sense and raised many eyebrows as to why he would choose traditional investments that would give him a maximum return of 5% over his own scheme, which he said would give him a return of 50%. Barron further worked out that Ponzi's scheme would have needed around 160 million coupons to cover the amount of money invested. But there were only 27,000 coupons in circulation, and in July 1920, a story on the front page of the Boston Post talked about many of Barron's findings. Soon after, government officials went to Ponzi's office and investigated it. The Post also featured another story about Ponzi on its front page. This one was about his illegal activities in Montreal and what he did at Banco Zarossi. Left with no other choice, Ponzi turned himself in, and his reign came to an end. The federal government charged him with mail fraud, and he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, but served an additional 9 years because of state charges. After he finished his sentence, he was sent back to Italy, where he lived in poverty for the rest of his life. Ponzi had a meteoric rise and fall, and his scheme may have gone on for longer had it not been for the series of newspaper articles that exposed his fraudulent activity. He died in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1949. However, his legacy remains an enduring one even today. His actions are seen as a cautionary tale and a warning to investors of the risks of placing too much trust in investment opportunities that appear too good to be true. In the wake of Ponzi's downfall, regulations were passed to protect investors from scams like this. But despite these regulations, Ponzi schemes remain a common occurrence and have been employed numerous times since the 1920s. Well, that's it for our video today. If you enjoyed our content, please be sure to subscribe, like the video, and hit the bell icon to stay notified of future videos, as this helps the channel out more than you can imagine. Thank you so much, have a good one.